The wine glass hit the marble and shattered with a sharp, piercing crack. For a second, the whole room froze. My daughter-in-law's mother was on the floor, convulsing, foam gathering at her lips. And all I could think was, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Before I tell you what really happened that night, you should know something about me. I didn't reach 70 by being naive, and I didn't build a $23 million consulting firm by trusting the wrong people. I sold that company the morning of the party. My last deal, my grand finale after 15 years of running it alone since my husband passed. My son Grant thought the evening should be a celebration. "Mom, you deserve this," he said. "Let Sophie handle everything. You've done enough." Sophie, my daughter-in-law, never handled anything. The woman complained about dusting a table, yet somehow she spent the entire week before the party polishing silverware and arranging flowers like a professional hostess. I remember watching her flutter around my kitchen that day, smiling too much, acting like we were best friends. The house looked perfect. Music, candles, champagne on ice, friends, colleagues, neighbors. It was supposed to be one of those nights you look back on with warmth, the kind that makes you forget how ruthless life can be. Then I saw her, across the kitchen, near the champagne table. Sophie's hand slipped into her clutch, pulling out a small glass vial. She glanced around, quick, nervous, and poured something into a single glass. Not just any glass, the one with a tiny chip on the rim. My glass. I didn't move, didn't blink, just kept talking to a colleague, pretending I hadn't noticed. I've learned that, in life and in business, you never stop a storm before it forms. You let it build. You watch where it hits. Minutes later, she walked over, smiling like a magazine ad. "Riley, you look tired," she said softly, offering me the glass. "You should drink. You've earned it." I took it, smiled, thanked her. And when she turned away to brag about her new diamond bracelet, I quietly set my glass beside another one, the one her mother had left unattended. 5 minutes later, the crystal shattered. Everyone screamed. Sophie froze. My son shouted for help, and I stood there, calm, watching the chaos unfold around me. Champagne dripping down the counter, the smell of perfume and fear thick in the air. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that people's true selves reveal themselves in moments like that. Her panic wasn't grief. It was recognition that the plan had failed and the wrong person had paid the price. So before you think this is a story about tragedy, let me stop you there. It's not. This is about what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness. Because when someone tries to poison you in your own home, you don't panic. You don't scream. You don't run. You watch. You wait. And you let them think they've won. Because sometimes, the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's caught a mouse. The ambulance lights painted my driveway in flashes of red and blue, violent colors against the quiet night. I followed them through the dark streets to St. Mary's, my hand steady on the wheel, my mind sharper than it had been in years. People say panic makes you blind. That's not true. Panic makes you see everything. Every detail, every crack in the mask. By the time I walked into the emergency room, the party dress on Sophie was already wrinkled. Her mascara smeared just enough to look tragic. She was sobbing in the corner, loud, deliberate, a performance meant to draw eyes. Grant sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. The way her body leaned into his, the way he avoided looking at me, it told me more than any words could. A young doctor appeared, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Walsh's condition is stable for now," he said. "We're treating her for acute poisoning, plant alkaloids, based on the initial readings." The word poisoning hung in the air like static. I felt Sophie stiffen before I even turned to look at her. "Poisoning," she gasped, her voice pitching high. "Oh my God, that can't be right. She barely had a sip of champagne." I studied her face carefully. The color drained faster than it should have, her eyes darting too quickly toward Grant, searching for reassurance or approval. Her trembling wasn't fear. It was a calculation. I didn't say anything about champagne, I said quietly. The words dropped between us like a stone. Sophie blinked, once, twice, before stammering, I just assumed. Everyone was drinking it. Grant's arm tightened around her. Mom, he muttered, his jaw set. This isn't the time. No, dear, it's exactly the time. We waited together in the sterile brightness of the waiting room. White walls, humming lights, and the faint antiseptic smell that clung to everything. Sophie couldn't sit still. She paced the floor, heels clicking against the tile like a clock counting down her patience. Grant scrolled endlessly through his phone, pretending to read messages. Every few minutes he glanced up at me. Quick, nervous looks that ended just as fast. I sat quietly, hands folded, watching, listening, breathing. That's the thing about silence. People mistake it for weakness, when in reality it's the most powerful weapon you can hold. An hour later, the doctor returned. She's stable, he said. We'll keep her overnight for observation. Toxicology results should be back by morning. Sophie pressed a hand to her chest, exhaling dramatically. Thank God, she said, her voice cracking just enough to sound fragile. Grant stood. Mom, you should go home. We'll stay here. You've had enough excitement for one night. I smiled slightly. You don't think I should see her? It's late, he said quickly. You need to rest. We'll take care of everything. Of course. Keep me out of the way while they clean up the mess. That's thoughtful, dear, I replied. But Helen's practically family. I'll drive myself. Sophie opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Just that thin, tight smile people wear when they've run out of lies. At the hospital ward, they let me see Helen through the observation window. She looked fragile under the harsh fluorescent light. Pale skin, chest rising and falling under the rhythm of the monitor. A nurse beside me murmured, "They're running tests now. We should know exactly what she ingested by morning." Sophie stood next to me, voice trembling. I just don't understand how this could happen. Maybe it was something she ate. I turned to her, my tone light but sharp. Or something she drank. Her lips twitched, just slightly. Right, yes, maybe. Grant cleared his throat. Mom, really? We'll handle it. You should go home. I looked at both of them. My son, looking older than he should, and his perfect wife, wrapped in guilt she was trying to disguise as grief. They stood side by side, their bodies close, but their eyes miles apart. I'm sure you will, I said softly. You always do. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt colder than it should have been. The parking lot lights reflected off the wet pavement, and for the first time that night, I saw my own reflection in the glass doors. Older, yes, but steady, in control. It wasn't fear that followed me home. It was clarity. It was time to figure out exactly what my loving family had planned for me. Morning sunlight spilled across the marble countertop, soft and golden, as if nothing had happened the night before. But the quiet felt wrong. Too clean, too careful. Like the house itself was holding its breath. The clock above the stove ticked steadily. Each sound landed heavy, sharp, counting seconds, counting truths. I sat at the table, fingers wrapped around a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. In front of me was my old leather ledger, worn edges, ink fading, the pages slightly warped from years of use. Numbers have a strange way of keeping people honest. I began flipping through it, slowly, carefully. Every page was a reminder of generosity disguised as love. 5 years of help. 100 here. 10,000 there. A temporary loan when their business struggled. A favor when tuition came due. A bridge payment for the new house. The unsafe car. Line after line, the numbers stacked like quiet accusations. $212,000. Gone. My hand paused over the latest entry. $15,000 withdrawn 2 weeks ago. The exact day Grant came by with that easy smile and the line he always used. "Mom, don't worry. We've got everything under control." He'd said it like a son comforting his aging mother. But even then, something in his tone felt rehearsed. Too smooth, like a man reading from a script he didn't quite believe in. I sipped my coffee, bitter and lukewarm, and opened the drawer beside me. There, folded neatly, were the credit statements I'd taken from Sophie's purse last month. I hadn't meant to look, but the envelope was half open, her name printed across the top. The numbers told another story. Maxed out cards, late fees, interest piled high, a life of designer handbags, resorts, imported wine, all paid for on borrowed time. Their world sparkled on the surface, but underneath, it was rotting. Debt, a lot of it. The doorbell broke the silence. Through the glass, I saw them. Grant standing too straight, clutching a bouquet like an apology, and Sophie, flawless as ever, her smile stretched tight across her face. That same fragile sweetness she used whenever she wanted something. "Mom," Grant said softly as I opened the door, "we just wanted to check on you. After last night, we were worried." "Were you?" I asked lightly. His eyes flickered down. Sophie stepped forward, her perfume announcing her before her voice did. Floral, heavy, familiar. "We were talking on the way here," she said gently. "Maybe it's time you took a little break. Somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. You've been through so much stress lately." I tilted my head. "Safe?" She nodded eagerly. "There's this beautiful place, Sunset Manor. It's not really a nursing home, more like a retreat. Private rooms, gardens, yoga, even a piano in the lounge. You'd love it." I laughed softly. "A retirement home?" "Not a home, Mom," Grant interjected, quick, nervous. "It's assisted living. You'd still have your independence. We just want you to rest, let people take care of you for a while." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the swirl of cream spread like smoke in water. My voice stayed calm. And who would take care of everything else while I'm gone? The funds from the company's sale haven't cleared yet. Grant hesitated. Sophie jumped in, her tone honey smooth but trembling at the edges. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss. There's some paperwork, financial management, medical consent, power of attorney. Just basic things, really. It would make everything easier. For you." Her eyes flicked toward Grant. A tiny, unconscious glance. The kind people share when they think no one notices. I smiled faintly. "You mean easier for you?" Sophie's lips parted in surprise, then curved again into that careful, brittle smile. "Oh, Mom, you know we only want what's best for you." I nodded, eyes kind. "Of course you do. You're my family." Her shoulders dropped. Grant's posture softened. The tension in the room bled out, replaced by the illusion of peace. We sat for another half hour, chatting about nothing. The weather, Helen's recovery, the sale. I let my voice tremble once or twice, dropped a spoon, apologized for forgetting what I'd just said. I even let my hand shake when I reached for my cup. Every little act was deliberate and effective. By the time they stood to leave, Sophie looked reassured, even triumphant. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, her perfume clinging like a memory I didn't want. Grant hugged me tight, the way a son does when he's trying to convince himself he's still a good man. "Get some rest, Mom," he said softly. "I will," I lied. I watched from the window as their car backed down the driveway, Grant's hand resting on the steering wheel, Sophie's head turning toward him, lips moving in words I couldn't hear. Probably planning the next step. When the taillights disappeared, I turned back to the table. The ledger still lay open, pages filled with numbers that no longer felt like debts. They were evidence. I opened my laptop, pulled up the email Grant had sent last week. Power of attorney, draft. No subject line. No explanation. Just a document waiting for my signature. They thought I'd click. They thought I'd trust. I smiled slowly, not out of amusement but recognition. They thought I was just an old woman with too much money. They were wrong. Morning came gray and heavy. The house smelled faintly of lilies from last night's bouquet, Sophie's idea of a comfort gesture. I threw them in the trash. Nothing about this situation smelled like comfort. The night after the hospital, I barely slept. My mind kept turning the same pieces over and over, rearranging them like chess on a board that had suddenly come alive. Every glance, every word from Grant and Sophie, the champagne glass, Helen's collapse, it all fit together, horribly neat. By dawn, I had a plan. Caleb Norton was the only person I trusted with it. We'd worked together for 2 decades, through mergers, lawsuits, and audits that could have sunk men half his age. Caleb had that rare kind of steadiness that makes other people drop their guard. He was careful, quiet, and most importantly, loyal. When I called, he answered on the first ring. "Riley," he said, his tone low and deliberate, "you don't usually call this early. Something wrong?" "Yes," I said, staring out the window at my driveway where last night's tire tracks still glistened in the dew. "Something very wrong." 2 hours later, I was sitting in his downtown office, polished mahogany, gold-rimmed frames, a city skyline blurred by thin fog. Caleb sat across from me, his gray hair perfectly in place, glasses perched halfway down his nose. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. The party, the glass, Helen collapsing, the visit from Grant and Sophie, the retirement home, the documents, the tone in my son's voice when he said, "You should rest." Caleb didn't interrupt once. Only his pen moved. Quiet, precise strokes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Let's start with the basics," he said finally. "You think they're after your money?" "No," I replied. "I know they are." A pause. Then his lips twitched, just slightly. "Then we give them something to chase that isn't real." That's why I liked Caleb. He didn't waste time pretending the world was fair. For the next 2 hours, we built a fortress out of paper and law. My assets would be split into 3 layered trusts, each locked tighter than the next. If anyone tried to alter or contest them, automatic audits would trigger federal oversight. If anyone attempted to have me declared incompetent, the entire estate would transfer to charity within 24 hours. "Your son will still inherit," Caleb said, scanning the final draft, "but it'll be limited. $50,000 a year, non-transferable. That's generous, considering." "And Sophie?" I asked. "She gets nothing." I nodded once. "Good. I don't reward failed murder attempts." When the papers were done, Caleb slid them across the desk. His eyes softened, just slightly. "Riley, I've seen people fight for money my whole career. But what you're describing, this isn't about greed. It's desperation. That makes them unpredictable." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm done reacting." Caleb smiled, a small approving curve. "You were always better at offense than defense." He wasn't wrong. By late afternoon, I was home again. The security van was already parked outside. 3 technicians unloading boxes of cameras, motion sensors, and a small black panic button that would alert the police in seconds. "Having trouble in the neighborhood?" one of them asked as he unboxed a wall unit. "Package thefts," I said smoothly. "You can't trust people these days." While they worked, I watched from the kitchen, the cables snaking through my walls, the quiet hum of new systems coming online. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm I recognized, the calm of control. When they left, the house was silent again, but different now, alive, alert. The cameras blinked softly in the corners, small, watchful eyes that didn't miss a thing. At 2 p.m., Caleb's courier arrived with a sealed envelope. Inside were the notarized documents, the new will, the trust agreements, the updated directives. I signed the last page with a steady hand and sealed it again. The weight of that envelope felt like armor. Then, as if on cue, my doorbell rang. Through the camera feed, I saw them, Grant and Sophie, together, coordinated, like they'd rehearsed the visit. Grant wore that same pale blue shirt he always put on when he wanted to look responsible. Sophie, dressed in white like innocence itself, carried another bouquet. I almost laughed. I opened the door before they could ring again. "Mom," Grant said, smiling tightly. "We were in the neighborhood." "How convenient," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." They settled in the living room, the one that now had a discreet lens tucked between two photo frames. I sat across from them, coffee in hand, calm as stone. Grant glanced toward the corner. "New security setup?" "Yes," I said. "Can't be too careful." Sophie forced a small laugh. "Of course not. You've always been ahead of the curve." Her voice trembled on the last word. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes. Helen's recovery, the sale of my company, the weather. It all felt absurdly polite, like a family brunch that had forgotten its corpse in the closet. Then Grant cleared his throat, his fingers drumming softly on his knee. "Mom," he began, "we were wondering if you'd had time to think about what we discussed, about Sunset Manor and the financial paperwork." I let a beat of silence stretch, long enough to make them both shift in their seats. "I did," I said finally, "and I decided to make a few updates." Sophie blinked. "Updates?" "Yes," I said. "To my will." The words hung there, invisible but heavy. Grant's face changed first. A flicker of panic he tried to hide behind a forced smile. "You updated your will." I did. After what happened at the party, I realized my old one was out of date. I needed to make sure everything reflected my current priorities. Sophie's hands twisted in her lap. "That's smart," she said, her voice too high. "Of course. I'm sure whatever you decided is for the best." "Oh, I think so too." The silence that followed was electric, the kind that doesn't need words to wound. I stood, smoothing the hem of my cardigan. "You'll be hearing from Caleb soon. He's handling the details." Grant rose halfway from his chair. "Mom, wait. We just wanted to help," I finished for him. "I know. You've said that before." He froze, mouth slightly open. Sophie stared at the floor. I walked them to the door with perfect politeness. "Drive safe," I said. "It's supposed to rain tonight." They didn't answer. Through the security feed, I watched them linger in the driveway. Grant pacing, Sophie gesturing furiously, her expression tight with anger. He tried to calm her, but she pushed him away, getting into the car with a slam that shook the camera feed. When their headlights finally disappeared, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. The house was quiet again. My kind of quiet, deliberate, and safe. I poured a glass of wine and carried it to the study. The documents Caleb had drafted lay on my desk, neatly stacked. Beneath them, the faint reflection of my own face looked back from the polished wood. Older, yes, but steady. They thought they could corner me, manipulate me, take what I'd built, what I'd earned. But I'd spent a lifetime navigating men who underestimated me. Clients, competitors, even my own family. I took a slow sip of wine, savoring it like victory. The game was just beginning, and I'd been playing it far longer than they had. 3 days passed before the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't Grant or Sophie. It was Lena Walsh. She stood on my porch clutching a small purse like it was a shield, her knuckles white against the handle. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red but alert. Not the confused, poisoned woman I'd seen collapse at my party. "Riley," she said quietly, "I need to talk to you." Her voice shook on the first word but steadied on the rest, the sound of someone who'd stopped being a victim. I led her inside. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Sophie told me I had some sort of reaction to my medication," she said, sitting stiffly on the edge of my sofa. "But I don't take medication. Not since the blood pressure scare 5 years ago." I nodded once. "Go on." Her fingers fidgeted in her lap. That night, I remember the champagne. It tasted strange, bitter, metallic. I took a few sips, then everything blurred. But before that, she looked up, meeting my eyes. I saw Sophie at the drinks table. She was holding a little bottle, glass like the kind essential oils come in. She poured something into one of the glasses. I thought it was flavoring. I didn't think... Her voice broke. I took a deep breath, folded my hands, and said quietly, "You weren't supposed to drink that, Lena." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I switched the glasses," I said. "She meant it for me." The silence that followed was long and heavy. You could almost hear the truth settling between us, the awful weight of it. Lena's face went white. "She tried to poison you." "And I..." "You survived," I interrupted softly. "That's what matters now." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Tell me what you need me to do." It was the first moment in days I didn't feel alone. The next morning, I called April Dawes. We'd met years ago, back when she was a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud. April had a reputation for digging where no one wanted her to. Discreet, loyal, and expensive. "My kind of woman." "Riley Hartman," she said when she picked up. "Haven't heard from you since that energy firm scandal." "Something smaller this time," I said. "Family business. But the stakes are higher." April laughed softly. "Aren't they always?" By noon, she was sitting across from me in my study, a legal pad balanced on one knee, black coffee untouched. I told her everything. Not just about Sophie's attempted poisoning, but about the sudden concern for my mental health, the nursing home suggestion, the power of attorney papers, and Caleb's legal precautions. April didn't flinch. She just started listing names. Grant Hartman, Sophie Hartman. "I'll pull everything. Bank accounts, credit lines, insurance, medical associations." It took her 48 hours. When she returned, she didn't bother to sit. She simply dropped a manila folder on my desk. "Brace yourself," she said. Inside were printouts, statements, and photos. Grant and Sophie's financial situation was worse than I'd imagined. 2 mortgages, 3 refinance loans, $80,000 in credit card debt, and a boutique business that hadn't made profit in 2 years. They were living like royalty on borrowed time. But that wasn't the worst of it. April slid another paper toward me. "This," she said, "is a life insurance policy. $500,000 on your name. Purchased 6 months ago." I stared at the document. My own name listed under insured party. The beneficiary line read, "Sophie Hartman." "Legally, she claimed insurable interest as your caregiver and daughter-in-law," April explained. "The insurer probably assumed your son was co-beneficiary. It's technically legal if you sign nothing." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The paper spoke loud enough. April continued, flipping to another set of records. "Here's where it gets darker. Your son's been making payments to a doctor, Frank Alden. He's a geriatric psychiatrist, well known for writing competency reports in elder guardianship cases, conveniently lenient with his assessments, if you catch my drift." "So they were planning to have me declared mentally unfit," I said. April nodded. "Once that's filed, they'd gain control over your medical and financial decisions. With the power of attorney, they could legally move you to that Sunset Manor place and drain your accounts before you even had a chance to object." For a moment, the room spun. But not from shock, from clarity. The pieces all fit now. They hadn't just wanted my money. They'd wanted my life. I closed the folder and set it aside. "Thank you, April," I said. "How soon can you have copies of everything notarized and sealed?" "Already done." She smiled. "What's next?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar thrill I used to get before closing a high-stakes deal. "Now," I said, "we play along." That afternoon, I called Grant. "Sweetheart," I began, soft and measured. I've been thinking about what you and Sophie said. You're right. Maybe I do need some help managing things. I'd like to go over the paperwork with you tomorrow." There was a pause, then the sound of pure relief in his voice. "Mom, that's wonderful. You won't regret it." "No," I thought. "You will." The next morning, the plan was in motion. Caleb arranged for 2 off-duty detectives to be present under the pretense of notarization witnesses. April wired the living room camera to record every word. Lena volunteered to stay nearby just in case the police needed a corroborating statement about the poisoning. I wore my softest cardigan, pale blue, the color of innocence. My hair was pinned back neatly. I looked every bit the frail, compliant mother they wanted me to be. When Grant and Sophie arrived, their faces were glowing with anticipation. They carried the same briefcase as before, the one labeled Power of Attorney and Residential Admission Forms. "Mom," Sophie said sweetly, "you look lovely today." "Thank you, dear," I replied, offering a calm smile. "I feel much better now that things are settling." Grant placed the briefcase on the table. "We brought everything. It'll be quick, just signatures." "Perfect," I said, folding my hands. "I do love efficiency." I let them walk me through the pages, every clause, every fake reassurance about security and peace of mind. Their words flowed smooth as oil. I nodded in all the right places, pretended confusion once or twice, just enough to keep them confident. Then, as I reached for the pen, the doorbell rang. Sophie frowned. "Were you expecting someone?" "Oh, yes," I said pleasantly. "Just the witnesses." 2 uniformed men stepped inside, their badges discreet but visible. Sophie's expression faltered. "Everything all right, Mrs. Hartman?" one of the officers asked, playing his part perfectly. "Everything's fine, officer," I said. "Just signing some documents. I like to be thorough." Grant laughed nervously. "Mom, this really isn't necessary." "Oh, I think it is," I interrupted softly. "After all, this paperwork gives you power over my entire life. We should all be clear about that." Sophie's smile cracked. "It's just a formality." "Of course," I said, sliding the folder back toward her. "But before I sign, perhaps you should explain the insurance policy, the one you took out on me." The blood drained from her face. Grant blinked, confused. "Insurance? What policy?" "The one listing Sophie as beneficiary." $500,000, Sophie stammered. It was just precaution." "Ah," I said, cutting her off. "Just like paying Dr. Frank Alden to declare me incompetent was precaution." Grant turned on her. "You what?" The argument that followed was chaotic. Raised voices, shifting blame, denials piling over lies. I let it go on just long enough for the camera to capture everything. Then I stood, calm and certain. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting clean through the noise. "You both thought you were setting a trap. In truth," I looked toward the blinking red light of the camera and finished, "you'd already stepped into mine." The morning of the signing arrived bright and unassuming. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors like nothing dark had ever touched this house. I baked scones, brewed coffee, and set out 3 cups. Everything looked ordinary. It had to. Grant and Sophie arrived right on time. They always did when there was money involved. Sophie was all smiles, perfume too sweet, voice too polished. Grant followed her in with his usual nervous energy, pretending confidence he didn't feel. "Mom," he said, setting down his briefcase, "you ready to get this over with?" "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "Today's a big day." I led them into the living room, the same room where they'd tried to steal my future a week earlier. The air felt heavier than usual, though neither of them seemed to notice. Sophie was already pulling out the power of attorney papers, arranging them neatly on the coffee table. Before she could begin, the doorbell rang. Sharp, official, not the sound of a friend arriving, but judgment. Grant frowned. "Expecting someone?" "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. My lawyer sent a representative to witness the signing. When I opened the door, it wasn't Caleb Norton standing there. It was Detective Nora Chambers. Behind her were two uniformed officers. Sophie froze mid-sentence. Grant's face went white. Mrs. Hartman. Detective Chambers greeted me with calm professionalism. We spoke briefly on the phone. May we come in? Please, I said, stepping aside. Grant tried to recover. Is something wrong? He asked, voice too tight. Detective Chambers ignored him. She placed a slim folder on the table. I think you'll want to hear this in person. The toxicology report came back this morning. Sophie's hand twitched. Toxicology? The detective opened the folder. The champagne from your party tested positive for oleander extract, a potent cardiac toxin. Slow-acting, bitter, fatal in sufficient doses. The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock. Grant's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sophie swallowed hard, color draining fast. That's impossible, she said weakly. No one would have access to something like that. Detective Chambers met her gaze. Funny thing is, we traced the purchase. A local herbal supplier shipped a vial of Nerium oleander concentrate to an online account belonging to you, Mrs. Hartman. Paid with your boutique's business card. Sophie shot to her feet. That's not, I didn't. The detective didn't blink. We also have a copy of a life insurance policy purchased 6 months ago in your mother-in-law's name. $500,000. You're the sole beneficiary. Grant turned sharply. What the hell is she talking about, Sophie? I can explain, she stammered. It was just insurance, just in case. In case what? I asked quietly. Her voice cracked. You were supposed to sign the papers. Grant interrupted, furious. Papers? What papers? Detective Chambers closed the folder with a soft thud. We also found payments from your joint account to Dr. Frank Alden, a psychiatrist known for false competency reports. The plan, as far as we can tell, was to have Mrs. Hartman declared mentally unfit, transfer power of attorney, and move her into Sunset Manor while the accounts were emptied. Grant buried his face in his hands. Oh my God, Sophie turned on him. Don't act innocent. It was your idea. That's enough, the detective snapped. She nodded to an officer who stepped forward and cuffed Sophie. You're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit financial fraud, Chambers said evenly. Sophie's voice cracked. You can't do this. She's lying. Actually, I said softly, you're the one who's been lying. She froze as I stood, calm, deliberate. You see, Sophie, I never signed the power of attorney. The document you brought was a forgery. The real paperwork, the one Caleb filed, placed every asset I own into a trust you can't touch. The moment you tried to use those fakes, it triggered alerts to my attorney and to the police. Sophie's lips trembled. You set me up. I met her gaze. No, you set yourself up. I just made sure the truth had somewhere to land. The detective gestured toward the door. Sophie's sobs echoed down the hall as the officers led her out. Grant sat motionless, pale and hollow. I didn't know she'd go that far, he whispered. I just thought if you were declared incompetent, it'd be temporary. We were drowning in debt, Mom. She said it was the only way. I looked at him. My son, grown and desperate. A stranger wearing my name. You destroyed your own life, I said quietly. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine. He looked up at me, broken, small, defeated. The same boy who once brought me dandelions from the backyard and said they were real flowers, too. I almost pitied him. Almost. Detective Chambers closed her notebook. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Hartman. The DA. We'll want a full statement, but we have what we need. Thank you, Detective, I said. My voice was steady even. When they left, the house fell still. The faint scent of Sophie's perfume lingered. Sharp, artificial, already fading. I walked to the window and watched the police car disappear down the street. Outside, the wind shook the autumn trees, scattering the last gold leaves across the drive. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. The storm had passed, but not without leaving its mark. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the same chair where all this began. For the first time in weeks, the air felt clean. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive quietly, at the right time, in the right hands. 3 months later, the house remembered how to be quiet in a kinder way. The sirens were long gone, the security cameras now as unremarkable as light switches, and the marble floors had returned to reflecting nothing but morning sun and muddy paw prints from the gardener's dog. Life has a way of laying itself back down after a storm, never quite the same, but steady enough to stand on. The verdicts came fast once the paper trail did the talking. Sophie pled down as far as she could, but there wasn't much ground left. 15 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. Grant took 3 for his part in the plan to have me declared incompetent. When the judge read the sentences, I watched my son stare at the table as if there might be a different life hidden in the grain. There wasn't. That night, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. "Grandma? It's Maya." Her voice was small but brave. I'm so sorry. I didn't know about any of it. I still want to see you if you'll have me." I told her there was a key under the blue pot by the kitchen door, just like there had always been. We made plans for summer, and the space that had been torn open inside me started to knit. Lena and I fell into a ritual of coffee on Tuesdays. She was quieter than she'd been before the party, less scattered, more deliberate. We talked about the kind of danger that wears a family face, and we decided our story would be useful if it helped even one person recognize the early signs. "Not everyone gets a second chance to switch the glass," she said, cupping her mug. I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll make sure they don't have to." Caleb kept his promises and his calendar. He arrived one afternoon with a neat stack of documents and that dry expression he saves for good news he refuses to dramatize. The insurance company voided Sophie's policy. Attempted murder tends to clear the fog in underwriting. Every premium refunded. Then he walked me through the last safeguard we'd set. If anyone, family or otherwise, ever tried to push a competency claim against me, the trusts would immediately and irrevocably shift the estate to charity. "A dead man's switch for greed," he said. I nodded. "Make sure the beneficiaries are the cancer fund and the scholarship program." He'd already filed it that way. The house changed in small ways. The framed photos stayed, but I moved a few. The one of Grant at 9, gap-toothed and grinning, went from the hallway to a drawer. Still mine. Just not for public display. I kept the dandelion he pressed in a book once, brittle and sun-pale. There's a difference between erasing the past and understanding it. Maya kept calling. Little check-ins that grew longer, updates about exams, a new debate team coach, the way her best friend corrected a judge without flinching. Then, one evening at dusk, when the garden smelled like tomatoes and wet stone, my phone buzzed again. "Grandma, I got in. Northwestern. Pre-law." She was breathless and laughing and crying all at once. "You were right. I wrote the essay about seeing the truth and putting it in writing." I told her I was proud in the way that makes your throat sting. She promised a visit in June. I told her the peonies would be out. On Thursdays, I walked the garden with a glass of wine and practiced the discipline that built my life, noticing. The roses revived under a gardener who actually listened. The fountain stopped sputtering once someone cleaned the line. The panic button became another quiet fact of home. Peace, it turns out, isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of control and the freedom to sit still anyway. Grant wrote me once from county, 2 pages of remorse, explanations, the word sorry sweating through the paper. I read it twice. Then I filed it with the legal documents, which is where apologies belong when they arrive too late and cost other people too much. Forgiveness, for me, is letting the courts do their job and refusing to let bitterness do mine. In the end, what mattered wasn't the spectacle of the arrest or the headlines that followed. It was the ordinary days that returned after. Good coffee, clean counters, the doorbell ringing at a reasonable hour, a neighbor waving across the hedge, Lena laughing at a joke I hadn't heard in years, Caleb leaving with a lighter briefcase than he brought, Maya's name lighting my phone and my front walk on the same June afternoon. I've had time to put words to what happened, and they're simpler than people expect. Being old doesn't mean being powerless. It means you've seen this game before and you remember the moves. You learn when to be quiet, when to ask a question with a single eyebrow, when to put a pen down and wait for the knock at the door. The best revenge is justice served, and living well enough that your enemies never taste peace again. This morning I sat on the back steps with a second cup and watched the peonies open, 1, then 3, then a small crowd of soft explosions. The sprinklers clicked on, the mail truck rattled by, and a text came through. Landing Friday. Don't start the garden tour without me. I smiled, sent a heart, and went inside to wash the breakfast dishes. Sometimes survival looks like paperwork and strategy. Sometimes it looks like flowers that return exactly when they're supposed to. Thanks for listening. If you've ever been underestimated, share your story below, because every quiet voice deserves to be heard.